Alright, we're back with part 2 of our Armored Munitorum Containers tutorial. In this one we're going to do some weathering. Just starting out here with a little Titus Corrosion. It gives a nice kind of oily, grimy appearance. I usually keep this kind of towards the bottom of my terrain. You're going to see here I'm just painting it into these little ridges and all over the feet. And putting it on kind of heavy so I can get a good bit of that texture that's in there to fill in. And you'll see just kind of varying up how high it goes. Like the container's been sitting in different levels of water and just had kind of different levels of grime that go all around. Cool thing about Titus Corrosion is it does give you a little bit of texture that you can then dry brush onto later. So it works for doing a really easy kind of rust pattern. However, it's not exactly what we're going to do with these containers. But I'm just going to kind of carry on here, covering the entire bottom of the container in Titus Corrosion. Alright, now we're just carrying on with some weathering with a bit of sponge. These came out of a battle foam carrying case. What you see is I ripped the sponge in half and it gives you a texture over your sponge so that you're not just getting a straight flat surface, but you're getting a bit of texture. We're going to start out with some Rhinox hide, and this is just to really give us that dark, old, dirty sort of rust look that you see on actual containers in the real world that have just kind of sat out in the elements and have gotten really rusty. Right now I'm just loading up the sponge, and as you can see here, just taking a bit of kitchen towel and wiping off any of the excess. So this is kind of like a dry brushing procedure. What we're going to do is we're going to take this and dab it onto the areas where we want the rust to be kind of built up. And this color we're going to get the most of. It's going to be the largest color in our gradient. We're going to go through some successively lighter browns and oranges and kind of reds and different colors. But for this Rhinox hide, we really want to get it nice and kind of heavy if we're looking for a heavy rust effect, which is what I am looking for. You can see I'm sort of concentrating on the bottom with my rust, not getting nearly up to the top of the container, just kind of letting the bottom of the container sort of be where the rust is settled, like these things have been sitting out once again in some pretty bad elements, but mostly just sitting in water and getting that rusted look. Now I do get up a little bit onto the sides of the container in some places here, up onto some of the raised areas, but we're eventually going to knock those back with some silver like the rust has been knocked off. You can see them getting up onto the sides of the container there, and you just kind of have to gauge what looks natural, what looks right. I highly recommend doing just a little bit at a time. Don't just try and cake it all on at once. Put on a little bit, let it dry, go to another part of the model. As you can see, I'm just doing one side here so the video doesn't run too terribly long. But I'm just really going to kind of carry on here, putting in some Rhinox hide, and then after that we'll be moving on to the next color, which I believe will be Doom Bull Brown. So yeah, picking up with Doom Bull Brown, this is a real ruddy, rusty red, kind of brownish color. It's pretty close to the color of the container when you mix just a little bit of Rhinox hide into it. But basically I'm loading up the sponge right now, exact same technique as we did with the Rhinox hide. And this color is actually going to end up being sort of our main rust color. I really like Doom Bull Brown as a rust color. It's just got that ruddiness and that red and brown color to it that just looks really good. So we're going to use this as sort of our main color over. And you can see just how bright that sort of comes in right there. I don't quite have enough off the sponge, but I'm actually okay with it because it's giving me a really heavy color. And I actually like that look here, just because the things that I've seen in nature or in the real world that have rust really kind of have this this ruddy red color to them that Doom Bull Brown gives really well. So I really like this as a color, and then it sits really well on top of the Rhinox hide to really give you that color transition from dark to light as the rust is progressing at different times throughout. Yeah, so you just carry on sponging this on into the recesses and the lower places, and just whatever you think looks good. Once again, do it slowly and build it up. Don't really cake it on all at once, or else you'll end up with something that you're probably not too happy with. So we'll just take this up to boots of speed, and we'll be back in a bit with the next color. All right, Scrag Brown is next. It's a lighter tone of brown, but it's also a little bit desaturated, so it's going to knock down some of that brightness that we got from Doombolt Brown, which can tend to be kind of a bright color and can really be kind of stark. So same technique here. You're going to use your sponge, you're going to dip it into your paint, you're going to knock off most of the paint like you would with a dry brush onto your kitchen towel, and then you're going to go with both the tapping and dabbing method and also the dab and streak method to get some different looks. Try them both out. You know, you're going to have kind of both in nature, so I like to use both types of strokes here with the sponge to get the best kind of natural look to your rust. The other thing is, as you're adding these colors, getting lighter and lighter in the tones, moving more towards orange, you're actually going to use just less and less of the color the same way you would with a dry brush or any other time that you're building up a gradient. You're going to get to your lighter colors, you're just going to use less. So once again, with this color, you know, dab it on a little bit at a time, let it dry, take a look at it, build it up slowly rather than quickly. That way you don't get too much, you don't end up dissatisfied with the way the end product worked out. After this, we're going to be moving on to using a dry brush paint and moving back into our brushes. Alright, so Rise of Rust is up next, and we're going to use a standard small dry brush here for this. And this is just your basic dry brushing technique. You want to just hit the really high points where you want that brightest rust color to really be sitting. Not necessarily high points on the model, but just the end points of your rust. So that can be either in, you know, on the edge of crevices, or it can be on the high points of the model itself. And this is just a typical standard dry brush technique. Just pull it across the edges and let the color build up slowly. And kind of the final touch to the rusting effect. Obviously, the way that you get rust is the paint chips and peels off and exposes the metal underneath the paint to the elements, and that causes it to rust. So there's going to be places where the rust will get knocked off because it is sort of a loose material once the metal has oxidized. So there'll be places where you'll see just bare metal. So we start with some lead belcher, and you can take this up through the brighter silvers if you want. I tend to just do lead belcher as I don't really need super shiny metal, and the lead belcher is shiny enough in comparison to everything else. But you're going to kind of use the same technique here and just sparingly catch all of the high points of the model. So any of the sharp edges around the different bracings or the ribs along the bottom, the feet, and just kind of catch some edges where you see that stuff would rub off. You see I had too much paint there, so I went back and rubbed some more of the paint off onto my towel, just to make sure I got a very small amount of paint. And you can see I'm just sort of dabbing it into areas, just wanting to catch. You can see I got too much right there, so you just take your finger and just sort of scuff it around, and you can fix some mistakes like that just by using your finger. These ends of the model are a great place to really catch some spots where scuffs would be, and that's kind of, you're just finishing off your rust here before we move on to chipping and scratching the upper part of the container. Alright, so we've got lead belcher here again, and we are going to finish up kind of chipping and scratching away the paint on the top of the container. So the previous bit of lead belcher we were using was to kind of accentuate the rust in places where the rust had fallen off. Well, on the top of the container here, I'm showing you we're not doing as much rust. You can see I've got a much smaller piece of sponge here, so I control a little bit better, and taking off a lot of the paint, just really, well, just a small amount on there. And so you can see we're going to focus here first on the little vents along the top. And I'm going to pull that in frame for you here in just a second. And what we do is we get right along the rib of the top of the frame, or the top of the vent, and then we also get the front-facing part. As you know, if these things were moving in large containers on, warp vessels or land vessels, once they make it to their destination planet, these are going to be the parts that are going to get knocked by other containers, and the paint's going to chip off really easy as other heavy objects are running into this one. And so that's kind of where we start. And then you'll just see, we'll carry on with this, just all of the different ribs along the side of the container, along the top of the container, the kind of archways on the doors on the end. Anything that looks like it's a raised part that would stick out from kind of the basic rectangle that's the middle of the container, we're just going to go through and we're going to weather up those edges. And once again, start out kind of sparing with this and just let it build up over time as you know go with the process, and you'll end up with a result that you're pretty happy with. You can see here that just kind of really being really careful to dab in right along the edges. You can do this with a brush, but it just doesn't give you quite the random pattern. You're going to end up more with just lines that look kind of like a sharp highlight. And I like it to be random. You know, there's places that you can see here where, you know, it's pretty heavily silver, where it looks like it's been chipped, but then there's a little bit of paint left where maybe the chip just hasn't been completely taken off. And so we'll just kind of speed this up to take you through and show you the end result. All right, here it is finished up. This is the side that we didn't do any weathering on. You see it's nice and clean and pristine looking, just has the natural shadows. And as we turn it around, you can see the side that's a little worse for wear. It's been out there in the Imperium getting a little bit messed up, and just shows its age a little bit. So there you have it. Nice, easy technique to weather up your sci-fi terrain. This can really be used with anything, not just these containers, obviously. You get the kind of full spectrum of browns all the way up to orange for your rust, and then just chip on some silver. And the one thing you need is just some sponges. Whether they came in your blister packs or they came out of your pluck foam, they work really great. And just tear them in half, get these crazy little textures on them, and really go to town. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and give us a sub on the channel. And as always, we will see you in the next video.